So this is the August 27th study session of the Littleton City Council. First item on the agenda is discussion on retail marijuana licensing. And on this discussion, I think the first thing we have to determine in order to even proceed with this discussion at all, there's a couple things we need to determine. One is if, in fact, we want to allow retail marijuana in Littleton. We have not made a determination on that. If we do not want to allow retail and just continue with the medical, then we don't need to worry about this anymore. So we would need, clearly majority to determine that we don't want to, and that I think that would have to go as an ordinance, correct?
Yes, we'd have to prohibit ordinance.
So we'd have to get staff direction to prepare that for our next meeting, and everything that we do tonight will have to be at our any of the stuff that we bring back will have to be at the next meeting based on the timing in order to get this done by October 1st. So is there any discussion on whether to not allow retail? Jim?
Well, you guys know that I've been out there preaching for a while that we ought to regulate marijuana like liquor and tax the hell out of it. And so the amendment was drawn up to kind of follow the state liquor laws. Not exactly, but it is following that. And therefore, I believe that we should allow the 4 existing medical operations to continue and to allow them to become retail marijuana establishments if they so desire. And then we'll regulate it from there, which this proposed ordinance that's before us for first look at tonight would do that.
So you are for having the retail?
Yes,
Bill?
I am.
Well, I'll hearken back to the conversation we had with the principals for LPS, both the middle schools and the high schools, all within the district. And each one of them, it's not even a gray area on whether to allow adult use retail as far as the message it sends to young folks, and they know that there may be other retail outlets within the city, or within the region, but they're very much in favor of that. And then, though the city, on a narrow vote, approved Amendment 64, District 3 itself actually voted Amendment 64 down. So with that looking, and my discussion with folks, and I realize that this deals with more than just the retail, the potential discussion we're having tonight, but with regard to retail, folks are in favor of eliminating the criminalization of minor possession, but they're not looking for additional shops in the city.
Gary?
I think the city of Littleton by a slim margin did vote for it, and I think we should go forward with the 4 establishments with no additional. I don't think, and if we're going to use the logic of the schools saying they are really afraid of it, then we should start shutting down liquor stores, because liquor is a huge problem in the high school. I think the issue that I heard from the teachers and principals, they said kids are stealing it from their parents. I think the parents, just as they do with alcohol or liquor, they need to lock up their liquor. And if they're having a problem with their kids stealing their medical marijuana, that's something that they need to deal with. But my feeling is that the city by slim margin did vote for it, and we should move forward with the 4 establishments already in place if they choose to go retail, without adding additional.
Bruce?
Yeah, I kind of view it as a rose by any other name. I think the medical came in, but in truth, from a practical standpoint, certainly had a covert sense of retail establishment to them, notwithstanding they had to cloak themselves in the medical approach. That genie is clearly out of the bottle at this point. We've had good experience with the existing 4. I'm not in favor of any more. I think the regulations we've got in place do a very credible job of compelling them to be good corporate citizens. So I'd be okay with them converting to retail as long as we have continuing strict oversight, but I'm not interested in more than 4.
Bruce?
Yeah, I'm going to stay with the position that I've taken before, that I'm not in favor of allowing retail in the city. And additionally, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that you want to take the existing medical locations, several of whom have a zoning, very exception to the zoning requirement, and just assume that they should continue on with that exception. I think if you're going to license them as a city new, then I think they should stand new with that new license to the zoning requirements. So I throw that out there, and then my argument, of course, has been it's still a federal crime. I'm kind of watching the news on that because there may be some information. Patrick Leahy has asked for his committee to meet with the Attorney General to come up with some specific guidance to states that have either medical or retail marijuana. So there may be some clarification at the federal level. That would be very helpful. And then the final thought that I have is we're surrounded by communities that have said no. Douglas County says no, Arapahoe County says no, Greenwood Village says no. And Denver says yes. I'm not sure that Littleton needs to say yes to allow citizens to have the right, but I'm not sure that Littleton wants to stand out when the whole South Metro area is saying no. So I continue with my no.
Peggy?
Parse out the pieces based on what various people said. I'm not real comfortable just allowing the current ones to convert, because when we approved those, they were for medical purposes, not for recreational use. So I'm not comfortable with that piece. There is going to be marijuana in Littleton no matter what we do. There's going to be a lot of recreational marijuana in Littleton no matter what we do. Mm-hmm. So I don't see a reason for us not to be selling it for the recreational use. So, and I mean, people are going to be using it. So how we parse out some of that, I'm not quite sure. But I do have a question. I thought I emailed this to somebody, one of the attorneys today, but I might have just thought I emailed it. If the voters don't approve the tax for it, what options do we have? Can we tie the approval to the approval of the tax? So that if the voters oppose the tax, we don't allow it?
We could make this ordinance only become effective if the voters by a majority approve the tax on marijuana. By October 1st, we do have to designate who is going to license in the city of Littleton. So we would at least have to pass a supplemental ordinance designating the licensing authority, presumably to handle the retail marijuana licenses if this ordinance jumps into effect upon the election. Additionally, you can prohibit at any time. So we could put this into effect, and you could then prohibit it at any time in the future. So if the tax doesn't pass and you decide you don't want to go down this road, the state will not begin issuing licenses until January. We would have some time where we could reconsider.
So, I mean, part of the reason I'm asking that is, Phil's saying, okay, District 3 didn't vote this way, and on the other hand, the overall city voted a certain way. So if the approval is tied to the tax, that, in a sense, is a referendum on the marijuana itself, in a sense. But we still have the authority, as you said, to not allow it even after it's been in effect for a while.
But isn't the 3%, or I think it's was it 3%, whatever it was, an additional tax?
Correct.
It's already going to be
Yes,
taxed.
yes,
So the question of whether it's additional tax.
Right, but it's still in a
So I don't think it
sense.
would necessarily say that, no, they don't want it altogether.
No,
I mean,
but
if
it-
we want to do it, we have to do it in 2 questions,
But I think it might be somewhat of an indicator.
not to me.
But then again, some people may vote against it, because the very interesting editorial, I think, in the Post today, that, medical marijuana will still be a hot item because it's not being taxed, so people who are getting that, who maybe should not be getting it now, might still be, and maybe more people would be trying to get that so they can avoid paying tax. So it's a real slippery slope. Anyway.
True, there's the additional tax, and then there's the age difference. So you would have those between 18 to 21 that would still be looking to get medical marijuana.
Phil?
I was going to say the editorial had to deal with the additional tax.
Right.
Medical marijuana is subject to the tax, just not the additional tax.
We tax it as we do regular stuff, right?
3%.
But, okay. You can tell how often I buy it, so.
Okay, so in terms of the council determining whether they want to proceed with a retail, just throw in my opinion on it. Of course, I'm completely opposed to it. I also believe that, and the law, what people voted on was not for us to open up retail operations. What people voted on, the Amendment 64 states very clearly that they were voting for the legalization of the use of a certain amount of marijuana for a certain age group, and the right for the cities and municipalities and jurisdictions to make their decisions about how they wanted to handle that. And that includes whether they did want to sell it, and if so, under what conditions. So by disallowing retail does not mean you are going against the vote of the community. You're not going against the vote of the citizens. You're going, that is what we were entitled to do within that. We are not making it illegal for recreational use. We are just not offering it for sale in Littleton. I also have great consternation over the conversations that we had with the leadership of the school district and their concerns about the availability and the culture that builds around that, and the desensitization that they're seeing amongst these kids at such incredibly young ages. I mean, the middle schools are dealing with this. And I just don't think that our community, which touts itself as quite a family-friendly community and a charming community and a community that embraces young families, it needs to have 4 shops selling recreational use marijuana. It also concerns me greatly that we are slowly, if in fact we do decide to sell the recreational, we are an island in the South. And it is not just serving the citizens of Littleton, it is serving the South Metro area. And we will have buyers and shoppers from all over. And I don't feel as though we need to supply the recreational marijuana for the South Metro area. There's a reason why the counties are disallowing retail. There's a reason why other cities are disallowing retail. And I would hope that we would, but it appears as though there are 3 of us who do not support the retail sale and 4 who do support the retail sale. So we will then move.
The 3 are who? Go ahead. I know you and Bruce for sure.
And Phil.
And Phil, you were against? Okay, yeah, okay.
So
District voted against.
the other discussion that we need to have,
Right.
I think now, before we move into some of the detail and depth of this, am I not thinking this right, is allowing the other uses. Because if we decide that we don't want to allow the other uses, then that gives a clear direction to the legal department as to what to do. So we need to make a decision about that. Jim?
Concerning that very issue, I was wondering if we're moving forward, if we could get to the public hearing and see, because the 4 that we've got now may or may not want to participate in that issue of having the other uses. If they don't, that makes our decision on how we would amend the ordinance on second reading very easy. If they come forward and say, yes, we'd like to be able to prepare food, infused food in our own kitchen, our own cooking facility, then that would be one other thing that we may want to take a look at. But we could wait until we do the second reading in order to amend this ordinance at that time. It may require another publication, but we can do that. We've done that in the past.
Well, they have stated in here that the 4 issues they want us to consider this evening, or at least.
But we could delay it until the public hearing, too.
We could.
I believe staff suggested that we not necessarily do this for a couple of years so that we can see how this is going otherwise, and that's what I prefer to do.
Okay.
Because if we get a handle on this and then discover that we don't think the sale itself is really what we want, we won't have to disassemble a whole kit and caboodle of stuff. I think the slow piece is better.
So you'd rather not
Have the other
not worry on this? Okay. Bruce, where are you at?
I'm feeling like taking the retail piece right now is enough, and then you get into the manufacturing or the growing or whatever, those other 3 choices, you're opening up a whole nother area of experience that we just don't have any, and neither does anybody else. I'm not comfortable with us being at the cutting edge of that one.
Bruce?
I think I'm likely comfortable with what Councilmember Beckman said. Just take it one step at a time. If we want to do the retail, that's fine. There's some other requirements and issues and code-related provisions associated with some of the other attributes. So if it turns out that things proceed in an orderly fashion, then we can certainly revisit that at some point in the future, present, or near or further out.
Barry?
Yeah, I in my mind, selling is one thing, growing and all the other good stuff is a different ballgame altogether. I think the retail part I don't have a problem with. I think even selling the infusion, I don't have an issue with that. The dual licensing as far as medical and the retail, I think that could cause some issues because medical being the 18 level. But I would rather, if an establishment is going to go to retail, that it be retail and forego the medical.
That's not
Bill?
the question.
That's my answer, though.
Well, the first part he answered.
The one exception I might say is the area of a testing facility. I mean, that's essentially a lab only. It's not a cultivation. It's not a growing. It's not a selling or not. It's a testing facility. And that would be the one that I would say I would take a look at, because we have other medical testing facilities that are here in the city, and I may not know enough about it, but that would be the one that I'd like to maybe take a look at. The others that are involved in cultivation go slow.
On that testing facility, I wouldn't want that, if we were to say no on that, I wouldn't want that to be interpreted that a retailer couldn't ensure that he had the product by testing it, because you can do a THC test or whatever, and he should be able to verify his own product just as a business practice. I just don't want to get into creating another operation around this, and I'm thinking of the lab, I'm thinking of coming and going and shipping in and shipping out and all those kinds of things.
Okay, Jim?
Well, in the first place, I'm not sure I know enough about all of them to say yay or nay. The way I'm reading part of that, we probably don't have the space for cultivation for a large retail area. It would be, excuse me, for a large wholesale area, because it takes somewhat larger space and a lot of power. But frankly, I guess my bottom line is I'd like to see all three of them go forward, and then we'll eliminate them as they create problems for us.
Okay. Well, I'm not in favor of either one of those at this point, or probably ever. Neither one of them generate any sales tax. None of it's sale to consumer. It's all wholesale, or it's all service testing. It's not, it would generate probably some level of employment, but again, where are we going to put it? Not interested. I'd rather be known for other businesses and industries than that. So at this point, we don't have the support for those two entities to go forward with any ordinance. What we do have is the support for existing retail operations. Okay, so then the only other thing, I wanted to make a couple quick...
Just a clarification on that, on the four. It's the four existing can become straight retail, mixed retail or medical, or retain medical, but the total in some mixed form is four. That's what
Correct.
we're saying. Okay,
Correct.
that was my understanding.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question. So based on that, suppose they opt to go full recreational, right? You said that would be an option, right? And then possibly we would say we don't want to allow that anymore. Would they be able to opt back to medical?
I don't know.
Yeah, yes, they would just not renew, or they would cancel their retail license. They're two separate licenses.
Yes, but if they didn't maintain the one, they would just apply for it again?
Oh, if they had just gone to retail and they wanted to go back to medical, well, I could certainly draft to address that.
I mean, because I want us to,
I mean, all four of them said that they wanted to retain the medical.
They
when we
wanted-
spoke to them. So,
That's going to be their business decision, too, if they
well,
want to
no,
hold
but I
on
just
their
wanted
license
to
or
know
not.
if they did go full bore, would they be able to go back?
none of them said they wanted to eliminate the existing licensing.
But if they wind up doing that, I think we should address that before that might happen, just as to cover our bases.
Yeah, I can add that in.
Okay, two things to keep in mind as we go through this. One of them is that much of this was written based off of our medical marijuana code, which is incredibly strong. It was definitely a code, that whole exercise is definitely something we can all be really proud of, because it has held the test of time. We probably have four of the best behaved medical marijuana shops in the region, and it has been actually very good for the police. They have been able to quickly interpret and keep things under control with it. So much of what you've got here is based on that, which should require little change. Secondly, the state is taking a much greater lead on this than they did on the medical marijuana. So in places where we had to get very ingrained and engrossed in legislating that, the state is taking a bigger role in that with the recreational. So keep in mind that we've already got pretty well established, and then what's coming in on top of that is state stuff. So there may not be a lot of tweaking for us. The only other
On the-
thing,
On the state level, I'm still in a, okay, trust but verify.
the other thing is that we did receive like 3 or 4 pages of edits from Peggy on the ordinance. And I would just suggest on that, instead of going through each one of those, to defer to the legal. This is a legal document, and some of the edits were more wordsmithing or grammatical type of things, and if that's something that is appropriate to make those changes in there from a legal perspective, then if we're okay with the city attorney making that call. And then if you don't mind going through, if any of those you had a question where you would like to get some policy direction from council on any of those issues that were in there, as opposed to going through line by line. Is everybody okay with that?
Mayor, if I may, the other thing I would remind is, as Kristen said earlier, these don't go into effect until January, but we need to get something in place prior to October 1st. So part of this is getting the operational foundation in place. And if there's, whether it's the trust and verify that Phil just identified and we want to do some tweaking, we have ample time post October 11th for this. And so we're not looking necessarily for perfection. And as the mayor said, this was based on the medical marijuana, which has withstood the test of time for several years now. And so I'm just suggesting that as this evolution occurs, we can amend as council deems fit.
And I want to clarify, since members of the audience watching are here, most of what I sent was not edits. They were legal clarifications of issues, or something that I wondered whether we needed to add. They're not minor things, so, but I don't mind turning them over to the legal staff to deal with.
And I think, and as I went through your stuff, Peggy, most of it I didn't think was necessary.
Yeah,
You know, but I have no problem with leaving it up to them to figure it
Yeah,
out.
well, I mean, that's what I do. I mean, I ask, and then they decide, so.
Well, I do think it's something that we all need to have at least taken a look at, and if we all feel good with what's on here, that the legal makes that decision. And then, do you want to go ahead and get any clarification on any of that before we dig in, or
I can
would
go.
you like
I
to-
can probably sort of touch on her concerns as we go through.
Okay,
That might
good.
be the easiest way, if that's okay.
Okay.
Mayor, the one other request that came in was, because Denver is in the process of finalizing theirs, was looking at differences between ours and theirs to make sure that there wasn't significant differences in licensing requirements. And so as we go through, I can highlight those as well so you guys have some understanding. There's only a couple.
Denver
so-
set such a stellar example on how to deal with this.
Or I can just sit back again if you would prefer.
Well, let's see if they've learned any lessons.
I did make that request because when I saw in the paper today, they had certain hours of operation and some things that I was thinking, if our hours of operations were radically different than what theirs were, that may not be a good thing. We might want to have the same hours, just so that we don't have the after hours location when Denver's closed, things like that were unintended. But so I just wanted to make sure we looked.
We're shutting our close at 7 p.m.
Right.
As does Denver's. The only difference is Denver opens a little earlier than we do. They open at 8, we open at 9.
Bill?
And the one thing, at least my recollection is that we may have left as a gap is in our allowable locations. We didn't consider schools that might be in areas outside of the city borders, but they are existing schools. And I'd like to see that tightened up, so it's not just schools that happen to be within the city, but we're following kind of the federal guidelines in general of any schools.
And that's the one over on,
Arapahoe.
yeah. And the others are okay? I think the others locations.
I think the others are.
That one is an issue,
Yeah.
still.
Okay.
Can I actually get some clarification on that? Because I don't see that language in the code. Is that the way we've been doing it? Do we?
No, we didn't have it in our existing medical marijuana code, so I'd like to see that interjected for the retail operation, that we're following closer to the federal guidelines on locations and include schools, exempt areas or no-zone areas that include schools that are outside of the city boundaries.
And on that particular one, didn't we have an issue, I mean, we went to court on it, right?
Well, we went to court on that location, but that wasn't,
And the
that
location.
wasn't the.
And they're
We
still,
didn't go for that reason,
are they still allowed to operate though after the courts have all
Yeah.
said, or they're not allowed?
not in that location.
Not in that location. But just to make sure we recognize that wherever it might be, in case one of these wants to change their location, they'll still have a license. If they go to an allowable location, I don't want them to be in a position where they'd go back to that.
You can,
I guess, because I read the code saying it can't be within 1,000 feet of any school, college, and it doesn't limit it to just those
I
in
know,
the
but it
city.
ended up being interpreted as within the city, so that's why I'd like to make sure we're
it
tight.
says any.
I don't get that.
Can I ask Glenn to do you, okay. I would be surprised if that was the way you were interpreting it, but I don't know the history you're referring to, so.
I just want to make sure we're tight on that, Chris.
And I did add a section 7 based on Councilmember Beckman's comment about within a designated or state drug-free zone, just to,
Thank you, yeah.
if those distances get changed, then
That
it will.
that may include the school issue. That may,
Yeah.
it may just happen that it falls in that.
Yeah.
What was that? I don't remember seeing.
The
Drug-free.
feds came out with legislation that created drug-free zones, and it had additional punishment, and additional kinds of circumstances for enforcement in that drug-free zone. It's kind of a zero-tolerance kind of response by the feds, included in which were schools. Now, when you get to little schools and smaller schools, I don't know how the feds dealt with it versus, traditional kinds of schools, but they exist. Littleton, for instance, is a drug-free zone.
And then I have a question on just where we are is, if someone is currently a medical marijuana center and they would like to be dually licensed for retail or adult use marijuana, do they have to go through the hearing process for that?
As it's drafted now, yes.
Thank you.
Jim?
Are we going to talk about some specific things that are in this proposed ordinance? Mm-hmm. Are you ready
Yep,
to start?
we're trying to get started. Are we ready? Go.
So I think the easiest thing to do, because I was working from the medical marijuana ordinance, which I think is working pretty well, I just want to highlight items that are different for you, and then some other questions that I have as we try to finalize this for first reading. So obviously, some of the definitions are different, but I don't think I need to go through those, but they're just specific to retail. If you jump ahead to page 6, this is application for license. Under number 7 and 8, under medical marijuana, we currently require, we only require in the application for them to include owners that own more than 5% of the entity. And you'll see that I drafted it so that we're capturing anyone who holds any financial interest. Yes.
Along those same things on 7, 8, and 9, I'm wondering if we should also require fingerprinting and background checks for any of those. We talked about it for the manager, for the owner, for the applicant, but specifying specifically that anybody who has any ownership, partnership, corporation, whatever, has to go through the same thing that the applicant has to go through. I guess that's a question for this.
Counsel, yeah.
Along the same lines, I had, in my comment, thought about including employees also. As maybe in the old days, we used to have a liquor license for those that were serving. I'm seeing a parallel to those that are working the counter. They don't have a financial interest other than they're paid employees. But I would like to know that they're not felons at the same time.
What happened with the liquor license? So that the servers don't do that anymore?
Do not do that anymore.
When did that stop?
God, I'll bet it's 20 years ago, 15 years ago at
Yeah,
least.
my mom used to get one all the time for that, but and that was just a simple thing as going down and yeah, it wasn't that big a deal.
It was just knowing who they were and making sure you didn't have known felons working behind the bars. I throw it out as a thought.
So I'm just trying to think how that works, because at the time they apply for the license, they probably won't know who their employees are. And it would be something that they would, after they're established, they would hire their employees, and then there would be turnover, and they would, before they could begin working, they'd come in and see the clerk and go down to the police department, get fingerprinted. And I know that the state does talk about employees and what the requirements are. They have to, so I can check on that. I don't know off the top of my head what those requirements are, but I know the state does address it. So is that?
I think that it makes a lot of sense, the stricter, you make it very, very serious, because you can see even with liquor, what happens with liquor and selling to friends and that type of thing. So I don't think making it stricter is a problem. Everybody okay with that? Okay.
And if we're going to have a tax in the city, that's going to help pay for the additional, because this is an issue for the police department. It's going to take.
Well, we charge
some
for
time.
fingerprints.
And we can try, that's what I'm saying, we can cover this in a way that makes sense. We're not tacking something that's not being funded.
Yeah, I don't remember how much but we raised that a couple years ago, didn't we? We raised that fee for fingerprinting.
Yes.
And Bruce,
Okay.
was that for all employees of a bar? I mean, this should be all employees that we're talking about, I think.
Yeah.
If they were handling liquor, in that circumstance, if they were liquor handlers, they were servers, and they were getting, for the licensees, they had that process, but the servers who touched the liquor, not the waiters and waitresses, but then they didn't have a liquor license, they had to always get somebody who did. That was the intent of that.
In that same section, I added in that they need to go ahead and provide their state and city sales tax number, just to ensure that we're grabbing that. And then number 13, this is on page 7, I actually want an affirmative statement of whether or not they've ever had a license suspended or revoked or been convicted of a felony, just as a double check to that background check we're doing. One item that comes up here that is related to Peggy's questions, she had raised the question about, do we also need to not just be looking at revocation or suspension in this state, but other states that license as well. Washington right now doesn't, I think they don't license for sale. You're allowed to have marijuana. But I believe this would impact like California and some of the other states that have medical marijuana. And certainly in the future, if more states are licensing retail sales, it could become a problem. I don't think we'll have a lot of people coming in from out of state because of the residency requirement. They're required to be residents for 2 years. So, but at some point in the future, this could become information we might want to have.
When I know in the world of property management, we do CBI, national checks. So just because a person lives in Colorado, they tell us all their life, we still do a national check. And even that national check, depending on what company you go with, it may only be 36 states. So I do think, that's one of my questions I have is, are we including CBI requirements, national checks, and if so, how many states as a minimum, and what states?
Marijuana requires an FBI check in addition to the CBI check, so we would be getting national information. It would just be, I'm not sure though that would pull up if there was some sort of license that had been revoked. I mean, that would pull up criminal.
Well, we're looking for felony types, criminal activities, what we're looking for.
On B, and Peggy's question goes to A, but
And I was all the way down to C at the bottom of that page.
moving ahead.
He moves us along. Jim?
On item 13, we talk about holding ownership interest. I wonder if we need to have management, ownership or management interest in order to comply with A and B. What does the council think about adding that?
What was that again? One more time, sir?
On 13, any person holding any ownership or management interest has to comply with A and B.
Jim, wouldn't, just going back to some of the conversation, wouldn't management be an employee and you don't know at time of application who that might be?
That may be at the time of the application, but there is going to be a manager who's going to be there. And if you put it in here now, it would cover it in the future.
I can see an occasion where you have out-of-state ownership and that the only local contact would be someone designated a manager. So in that instance, it would probably be good.
But this is information to be included with the application for the license. I mean, I'm going back to page
How would we
6,
handle
which
that?
has C. That's what I'm saying. You may not know that at the time
Kristen,
of
how would we
application.
handle that?
I do think it makes sense to go ahead and include the managers on here. You wouldn't have an out-of-state owner because of the residency requirement, so, but I don't have any problem asking the manager. I mean, we're already having the managers provide their social security number, name, and address, and do fingerprints. So let's go ahead and have them affirmatively tell us that we're not going to find anything when we run their fingerprints. So I don't see a big deal with that.
What happens if they change the manager?
They have to notify us, and then, yes, they have, I think, 30 days to notify us, and then we run the whole process on the new manager.
How did that work with liquor stores when they did that?
It was what you just said.
Same thing.
There was a time period, had to be, you could let them go today, you had 30 days to let the city know. I think it was 30. I'm saying 30. I'm saying 30, I'm not sure. It was just let the city know, and then they had to come in and get interviewed and get fingerprinted and those kinds of things.
Okay, can I move on? So on page 8, under standards for issuance of license in number C, this is language that was included in a model ordinance I looked at. And this has to do, the language I'm looking at is whether or not the authority can rely on sort of what the state finds in looking at good moral character. And this is because the state goes first in looking at the applicant and screening them. And so it's whether or not you want the authority to conduct its own investigation and determination on good moral character, whether you want to allow them or require them to do their own investigation and make a specific determination on their own about that good moral character. I think going to Council Member Cernanic's comment about trust but verify, I would guess you would want them to go ahead and make their own determination on that.
Well, if I read this as they may incorporate it, but it's not relying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as it's permissive now, but you could make it they may not, and they have to.
Till proven otherwise.
Okay.
Jim?
I'm back up at number 5
Yeah, that's a good one.
on that page 8. Would investors, could you have investors who are not part of a corporation, partnership, ownership? Could you have investors in a retail establishment?
Like a shareholder type?
Yeah. That's not part of a corporation, it's just an individual investor who's investing in a retail operation. If that's the case, maybe investors ought to go into number 5.
Yes, and they can, and we do require them to provide us with those names, addresses, and social security numbers, and then you just added in the requirement that they be fingerprinted. So I do think it would make sense to add that there based on the previous edition.
Can you just expand on what number 5 really means? I mean, I've read that several times. I don't quite still get it.
So it means that we can't have an owner, an officer, or a manager who's had a felony within the last 5 years. That would be the big one.
But the part that this does not disqualify.
It's written in as a negative. Sorry.
Basically says if you had a felony 10 years ago, it doesn't necessarily disqualify.
Although it could be such a felony that it perhaps might go into the issue of good moral character. So.
I don't know, I just don't like the way it was. Also, when it says does not disqualify, that's where, to me, it becomes a really confusing sentence.
How about I re-draft that?
That would be cool.
Okay.
Thanks.
And then,
Before you, can I ask? On subsection B there, says the authority shall approve or deny no later than 90 days. In the event the authority does not approve or deny within 90 days, what would be such a circumstance?
this is from, I mean, the medical marijuana code has the same provision. One thing it does say that I actually will probably change it back is that the license will be, as opposed to being deemed approved, it'll be a conditional approval conditioned on compliance with the code. And now I've lost track of your question. I'm
Well, I
sorry.
guess what I was wondering was, I guess my suggestion was going to be, or throw out, why don't we just eliminate the last sentence in there and just make the authority approve or deny the license within 90 days, period, because I'd prefer to have our authority make a determination one way or the other and not just have it float to the state.
Yeah, I think that's more, it's probably just a protective provision for the applicant, but not, we can certainly strike it.
Or you could add the words, like temporary license until finalized or something like that.
Is there such a thing as they can get a temporary license?
What do you think, though?
Be conditional, I would think.
Yeah, conditional license. But once they satisfied those conditions, it would be a license and it would not have a temporary status.
But I have that one highlighted as well. And 90 days, we would hope would be enough, but we're talking to 4. Yeah.
That's my feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they ought to be able to handle 4, and I'd like a definitive decision as opposed to just let it flow. That's all, I'm just saying, whatever you guys think.
I'm thinking the reason you put that in there is when you were doing the medical, you thought there would be a big influx, and you could very possibly have swarmed the authority with so much work that they couldn't get through. I think that's the only reason that was in there, if I remember a discussion or something like that, just to protect, just to look like you were not trying to
Let's pull it
create
down.
unreasonable delay.
Removing it would work.
Okay.
So take it out.
So what did you just take out? I'm sorry.
Put a period after the word receipt, I believe.
So that in the event that the licensing authority doesn't either approve or deny the license within 90 days, it doesn't automatically default to an approval. That's what we struck.
Okay.
Right.
So I added on page 8 a specific section called denial. All right. No, never mind, we do have that. Disregard.
I had a question on page 9. Is there an appeal process? Not the liquor.
Where are you?
If the license is denied, the appeal process would be to court.
It begins at the bottom of page 8 and continues over page 9.
Okay.
Well, and before it goes to court, though, what I'd hope for is that, because it's going to be our board that does the approval, is that right?
Yes.
And if the board says no for some reason, I would rather the applicant have an opportunity to come to, I guess, the council or somebody before going to the next step of litigation.
We can do that. You don't do that for your liquor or your medical. So it would be a deviation from that process.
I think we should stay consistent.
Okay.
Guys,
Yeah.
all right on that? Okay.
No problem.
Go on.
Pretty much a binomial thing, right? Either each of these things, yes or no, right? It's except the moral character piece or whatever. It's
Yeah, correct. They're in the right location. They are residents. They're over 21. I mean, the one piece that's got some movement is that good moral character. That's a little more discretionary.
There's still room for someone to say, well, that's just not correct. So, but
We're only talking 4 at most.
So the next is on page 9, under decision by licensing authority. Here I actually call out that a public hearing will be held, and that notice of the hearing will be posted and published. And that the other thing that we don't do in medical is I added in a section that will provide the applicant's findings of any investigation 10 days prior to the hearing. They do get it now, in the packets, but I'm not sure, and Wendy's not here, I don't know whether or not that's provided sort of a longer period of time for the applicant to prepare for that. The next major addition I wanted to draw your attention to is on page 12 under 3-21-16. This has to do with suspension or revocation of the license. And if you look at number D, I've added in what the licensing authority should consider if they're considering a suspension. These sort of items right now are included in the licensing authority guidelines for liquor and medical, but I think it's more appropriate for it to be in the code so that the licensee is put on notice exactly of what the authority will be considering when they go through their show cause hearing. So I'd like to put it in here and then eventually also move it into the medical and liquor code. But if you want it kept in the licensing authority guidelines, I can strike this and put that in there.
I think that's necessary. I thought about that time going through there is what's the criteria that the licensing authority is using? And I think it'd be good to have that in there.
That's what I think too.
So I wanted to go back to the previous page because I had quite a few questions on that page.
Have we settled that question? Is everybody okay with that? Sure. Can we go back? Okay.
Which page, Peggy?
On page 11.
Okay. So it looks like you had some questions about, for example, use of the word objectionable, and I agree that could be struck.
It wasn't so much striking that word. I was trying to understand the logic. If something is a nuisance, it would seem to me in and of itself, it takes care of it. But, I'm just trying to hear the legal.
This is direct language from your medical marijuana ordinance. So that's the way it was crafted. I agree objectionable is probably redundant, and I had already planned to strike it.
Okay, so if we're keeping it consistent, that's okay. Maybe then if we ever tweak, then we can look at that. Because if I were on the board or on the authority, whatever, I'd be trying to figure out, well, at what point is it one thing versus the other, but they really are the same then, right?
Right. And then your other comment about not only is it the patrons, but also the operation of the business could cause nuisance, I agreed, and I added in a provision that if it relates to the patrons or the business operations, if it's causing a nuisance, it would fall under there. That's that same section F at the top of page 11.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then you had asked a question about whether the business has to permit immediate inspection, and the state statute says that they have to provide inspection at all times during business hours. So, yes, it is. And then
So that's clarified at the
state level. And then you had asked about the regulations relating to waste disposal, and I copied those. And I'm happy to pass them out so you can take a look. But I think the state does a good job of regulating waste disposal. They can't just leave it out on the street corner. It's got to be made virtually impossible to be
Kind of like
used
hazmat.
marijuana. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah. Then, in that section, then, under the suspension or revocation question I had there.
Oh, you had asked about whether we should add gross negligence or reckless indifference, and I don't think that's necessary because I think that would probably be covered under either number 2 or 3. If there was, for example, if they were to leave consumable, you had used the example of leaving consumable debris in the trash. That, for example, would violate the waste disposal regulations and would be a violation of 2 and 3.
And then, but higher up in that section, if there's a violation by the licensee or one of the partners in another state after they get the license, does that have bearing?
We would pick that up at the renewal. When we do a renewal, we have the police run a new CBI and FBI report, and we get that information at the time of renewal. And if anything comes up, we would bring them before the authority to consider that.
If there's something really egregious, some major violation in another state, are we wanting that connection here to be able to continue to operate?
I would remind you that the state is really leading in the licensing of these establishments, so it's likely that the state is going to hear about it and act on it before we would, and they would notify us that there has been a problem, and they're revoking their license, which automatically would revoke. I feel like that's really comfortably handled by the state.
I have one question on 11, just to ask it. Item G, it says permits inspection by the city. And I just want to verify that fire, police, code enforcement, the finance department, everybody is covered in that, and there's no issues that those that need to get in there can't get in there.
No, I think because it says by the city, it would be any department of the city could go in. So tax, fire, community development, building. So the next big change is on page 13, the addition of the section on operating fees. I'll remind you that we are not allowed to charge license fees, renewal fees. We are authorized to charge an operating fee. One thing we will need to put into place is what that operating fee is, and it is supposed to cover our costs for administration, regulation, and implementation. Denver's ordinance set that fee at $5,000. I think I'll work with Michael, who will work with his department directors on what we think is a fee that will cover our costs, and then that will be what we charge.
The word fee would be proper in that case.
So is that money then tracked so that we have some kind of history of how is it really covering? Do we track that in some way, or just goes?
We track fees.
So and we bring in this much, and then how?
Yeah, periodically we go through and we evaluate and make sure that the fees are covering the cost, but we don't do audits to say did last year. I think what finance does right now is every 3 to 5 years they update the fees, and we do it more on a citywide basis, not an individual pick that particular fee and look at did it cover last year's. You leave it in there for a period of time, and at some point costs start to go up and you reevaluate. So, and that's what we do for all of our fees. So this would fall in line with that.
So the next additional provision I added in is the very next one, retail marijuana establishment requirements and restrictions. Some of these I pulled from, they were sort of scattered around the medical marijuana code, and I put them all together. And I thought it just made sense for them to all go here. One thing I did want to point out was the signage that's required in the store. I have 2 signs that are required. It's illegal to sell or transfer marijuana to anyone under the age of 21, and it's illegal to send or transport marijuana to another state, and that the possession of marijuana is a crime under federal law. Are there other sorts of posting notices that you would want to see posted in the premises?
Well, I guess I don't know. I mean, I don't have a problem with what you've got in here, other than if you're saying it's illegal to transport marijuana to another state, that's really not. That's a federal trade issue. It doesn't really have anything to do with the city.
I think it's just warning people that if they've come here as a tourist destination, that they can't take marijuana back with them to Texas, is what we're warning people, is that you don't want to come here and stock up on your marijuana and take it back.
That would be like taking firecrackers across the border.
And
Nobody does that.
we certainly don't have to warn them of that. It was just
Like I said, I don't have heartburn with it being in there, but I guess if the code is for enforcement within the city limits, it seems a bit extraneous, but.
Unless we're just saying, hey, by the way.
Yeah,
You're right.
sure.
I think it should be in there. It's not firecrackers.
Okay.
Federally illegal drug.
Yeah.
You
She wants one that says the
transport
mayor
it.
does not
Yeah.
support this establishment. too.
This one won't blow
Yeah.
your fingers off, though. Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody okay?
So the only thing I added to the next section, prohibited locations, was the designation within the drug-free zone. I did want to raise a question that Peggy raised in her comments, was whether we wanted to add a restriction on, she had a suggested restriction of within 1,000 feet of city center, the municipal courthouse, library, museum, and then she says, or other facility. I presume that means city-owned facility?
Sent that addition today. It's the city-owned facilities, right? Or government. I don't know if we want city or government so that we also include the county building.
And one reason I didn't care for that particular line was because it seems like we, the government, are passing this thing. On the other hand, we're saying, but keep it away from anything that has to do with government.
Well, I was thinking, the ones came to my mind first were the library and museum, even though I didn't put them in that order. And they're not parks. So, I mean, we have a park near, but they're not. And it seems to me we do not want people, seems to me,
I don't,
you know,
but doesn't it?
Well, they are within 1,000 feet of a public park. Museum is because of Kettering, and then
Gallup,
Courthouse.
is where Bemis is.
well, yeah, but it depends what side you're on.
It's from the boundary of the park. It's going to cover those areas.
You can put it there, it's residential zone.
Yeah.
But doesn't the law say that it's not like folks can walk around smoking?
No.
Correct, no public consumption.
Right. So regardless if it's government property or,
And this is
talking about
locations. This is retail locations. This is brick and mortars.
oh, right, look, yeah,
Jim?
One of the things that I'm concerned about of all these prohibitions is the very map that Glenn's got up here on the thing of where you can't put an establishment. And Inglewood just got sued over sex offenders prohibited in such a wide area that the courts ruled there was no place for them to live within the city limits. If we keep adding prohibitions up there, it's going to be the same thing. There's no place you can put an establishment in the city, and the courts, I think, will not look favorably upon that.
Is that what this map appears about?
That's the prohibition,
Okay,
prohibited areas right now.
Glenn, is he going to go over that then?
No. Kristen?
Except, council, I think the difference is that we're allowed by law to prohibit them entirely. So I guess I wouldn't be concerned with that. I think it's a little different than the sex offender. We're not allowed to prohibit sex offenders from living in our city.
Still not sure it's going to keep us from getting sued.
Well, I can't say I won't get us sued, but I don't think that they would prevail.
The one thing, Glenn, on your map, I believe the reservoir that's at the southwest part of the city has been annexed into South Platte Park, so that whole southwest corner actually gets covered by park.
Yes.
Yes.
So wait, what are the colors, man?
The green is proximity to park, the orange is schools, the dark brown are daycare centers. This is a correctional facility. We have the 1,000-foot buffer around the existing facilities. So that's what these circles are.
Glenn, has that been updated for the new Canamart location, or is
Yeah,
that?
that's the new location. Right. So what's basically in white are future locations. Other than right here, because we've got a Canamart there that's kind of taking up a little flow.
Future locations subject to the limitation.
Right, if somebody moves, roughly 4 moves.
Yeah, I think you're missing one childcare facility that's right on Mineral East of Broadway.
East of Broadway, okay.
There's also another one there it's already covered for something else.
Yeah, there's multiple layers over most of the city, as you can see.
Okay, Kristen.
So I just wanted to point out on page 15, number E, this is still under prohibited locations. I have specifically grandfathered in any of the existing locations for our current licensees. If they convert to retail, they can do that even if they don't meet the location requirements. And I want to just make sure that that is your intent.
Say again, the table over here is creaking. I didn't hear.
All right, so I've grandfathered in the 4 existing licensees in their locations. So converting to retail doesn't require them to move to a location that's allowed. If they're in an area that, say, well, doesn't meet the distance requirements, if they're in there now currently, we'll go ahead and let them convert to retail, and the grandfathering that they have now under medical will extend to retail.
And do we have to grandfather them?
You do not. If you do not, the only person that will meet the requirements is Canamart. Is that correct, Glenn? Okay.
So when we're saying that, just so my slow brain here hears it, so they're okay where they are now, but if they want to do the retail,
This says they're okay to do the retail where they are now, because my understanding was you were okay with what the 4 have been doing and where they've been doing it. So they'll be allowed to continue to do that with the addition of retail where they are.
What I heard, Peggy, is 3 of them were not, if they could not move into that location today under these guidelines.
Correct.
yes, and I have problems with letting them do retail that way.
And I had raised that issue too. I didn't know whether it was appropriate that we just grandfathered them in with a zoning exception for what, because I don't know what the reasons were before, and I don't know what the justification was. I just feel like the process should include something which legitimizes why they're in there as a retail location with an exception or not.
And I think Kristen would probably prefer that I say this than she say it, but it's very highly likely that if you don't do this, litigation is coming, considering if you think about Canamart, and I think that's why she said Canamart would be the only legitimate one. So we have very real concerns about, and that's why we drafted it the way we did, to allow them to be grandfathered in.
And if council wants to pursue this further, it would be advisable to schedule an executive session to get legal advice from our attorney regarding
Yes,
this.
I prefer to do that.
Okay.
I have a further question. At the public hearing then, that would transpire, that would be something that the public would know that they're within, within whatever the barrier was for whatever it was in the zoning. They would know that. They would have the opportunity to understand that. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's been in the materials that we've provided to you, and that hasn't been covered under a privilege or anything. We've made that available to the public, who meets the requirements and who doesn't. So I think if we want to have detailed discussions about what the legal ramifications are, I think an executive session might be beneficial.
I'm satisfied if the public knows. It may be wise to have the executive session, but that's really what I was getting to, that the public understands.
Chair.
Good idea, Bruce.
Peggy would like to continue a discussion of it in exec. Does anybody else want to do that? Okay.
The next section that's additional is 32122 on page 15. Persons prohibited as licensees and managers. And this is really actually kind of redundant. I suppose that this picks up, though, Peggy's concern about if something happens, after the license has been issued, they suddenly have their license revoked in another jurisdiction or something like that. I think it might get caught here. Obviously, then on page 16, the age restrictions change. We pop up from 18 to 21. One thing that was removed that was in the medical marijuana code was you required them to keep a ledger. We're not allowed to require that sort of information on a retail marijuana establishment, so that's been removed.
So can you go back to page 15? I did ask, should we have the age in the persons prohibited section, even though it's indirectly covered in the next section?
Oh, a person who's prohibited as a licensee. We could add in there a restriction that they have to be over 21 and a Colorado resident. Again, that's covered at the state level, and they would never get through the state licensing process. But if you want to make that point, we can include it here. And it's.
I think that's good for citizens to know that here, because people aren't necessarily going to be going and looking at the state, but to have that clear here, even so it's a redundancy for us, even though it's covered at the state.
I think I've got a concern about starting up the redundancies again, because we spent a long time clearing those up and cleaning those out because of some of the snags that could happen. So I would prefer we don't do that with this. Council? No? Okay.
A separate question.
Do you have a question?
Yes, separate question, which is, is there protection for the retail establishment on what can be used to be a proof of Colorado residency?
I am sure there is, and if I can look at that, or I can get you that information. I can look now.
I'd be fine, because I just want to know what kind of protection area they have versus.
Yeah, I am sure that the regulations address what satisfies that requirement. To bring it back for you? Okay.
You can send it out, yeah.
Okay.
I want to go back also to 15 again on signage. I'm concerned that there's nothing that can indicate that it's a retail marijuana store. I don't think people who don't want to go into those want to just meander in or have their little kids trying to meander in. I know somebody's supposed to stop them, but I don't think you should accidentally go into one just because you don't know what it is. And I know you all are going to say, well, everybody would know what it is, but I would tell you when marijuana was around lots of years ago, I didn't know diddly squat about stuff. So I stumbled around and into people doing stuff that I had no idea what they were doing. Now, that's not quite the same as this, but it seems to me people ought to know what the store is. They ought to know what a liquor store is.
Go ahead.
This is the exact language you have in the medical marijuana, and I haven't heard that that's been a problem with people understanding what that business is. Additionally, they would be required to post a sign saying no one under 21 can enter these premises. So hopefully, parents wouldn't be walking in inadvertently with children. I guess direction from council, this is what we use currently.
My thought on this is just drive down Broadway and you see what happens when you don't regulate this, when you don't mandate that, I think I think right there, that signage is one of the things that is one of the best things we did on that medical. And the reality is, people will find these places, there's no doubt about it. And there will be a sign, and I'm sure that code will be checking and making sure very clearly on the door, no one under 21 admitted. I mean, it's pretty apparent you're not walking into a candy store. So I think I don't want to see any leniency on that signage at all. Jim?
So the exception for medical marijuana card holders who are 19, 18, 20, that sign on the door doesn't apply to them?
No, you would not be able to, unless perhaps not all of our retail or our medical marijuana establishments are going to convert to retail. And so our residents who are 19 and hold a card could still go to those establishments, but they could not go into a retail or a dual licensed facility to purchase. Everyone has to be over 21 if you have a retail.
So does that require then a separation of the facility if they're going to do dual, and a separate entrance if they're going to be doing dual?
Good.
Yeah, under the state law, it would not, but we could still require that, even though the only difference would be the type of product. And in medical, you would still have to have the medical card, and you would not be charging additional sales tax. But you'd have to be 21 to go into either. So I guess I would like some direction from council about whether you still want those separate.
So like the storefront that's on Main Street, if we required a separation and signage, they could walk in because you can't change the facade of that building. So they'd have to walk into the front door, and then there'd be two doors for them to go either to the left into retail or to the right into medical.
I don't understand why you would do that, because...
I'm just asking the question.
No, I know, I'm just kind of processing it. If you have to be 21, that's the get-in card, I'm 21. If you're going to buy medical, you've got to have your
That's right.
card.
But you're not 21.
Necessarily, yeah.
But you have to be 21 to get into the car. If you're 18 and you have a medical card, you can't go into that store. You have to go into the one that is not going to go with retail.
Or one that has separate entrances.
Well, not in Littleton, because the way I've drafted it was that if they're dual licensing, both have to be 21.
And for what it's worth, Denver has a minimum age now of 21 in that dual license with no separation.
See, my concern is those people who have a medical reason, a medical card, that's 18, 19, and 20 years old, that you are affecting their health.
But there's one in Littleton that is not converting.
That's not what Michael said.
No, I thought you said all.
No, there's 3 of the 4.
You said, well, go all 4.
He said all 4 were continuing their...
Yeah, all 4 want to continue medical.
Right.
3 of them want to convert to retail as well. 1 wants to stay
medical.
just medical only.
So all the other 3 then would have to drive all their customers to the one who's going to remain
In
medical.
that
Well,
age category.
that age group.
In talking to the licensees, I didn't get the impression that they had a lot of patients between 18 and 21. It was, they had a few that they were concerned about that they would not be able to serve if we stuck with the 21, but it wasn't a large portion of
they
their
were not in
patients.
strong opposition of shifting to the 21 without a doubt.
Bruce?
I just think the beauty of saying 21 means you don't have to create all kinds of barricades and barriers and different entrances and things that are probably not really very businesslike. 21 takes care of that, and then if that other business wants to stay medical only, that's great, but that wasn't my concern. My concern was having a facility that is appropriate, because we still have that obligation to have an appropriate facility for the public.
When we used to have 18-year-old 3-2 bars, were there any establishments that had 3-2 bars and liquor where 18-year-old guys could go in with drink with the big boys?
Jerry, I don't remember specifically. I know that most of them kept it a separate area, and they did it with hand stamps. And they said, stay in one area or the other. But when I started, they just changed the law, and I really don't remember.
The partial difference on the 3-2 bars is they were allowed to consume on premises.
Well, yeah, I was just asking for the
that's-
age differential there. I think if it's just 21, that solves that issue there. But what are the arguments why they still want to keep the medical and also add retail? Have you heard any of those?
My guess is some of the conversation you had earlier, which is it is a business model. A lot of people will continue to maintain their medical license. It's not taxed at that same level, or potentially won't be taxed at that level. You can purchase a greater quantity with a license. And those people who are legitimately have that license legitimately will probably continue to maintain it. Those that it's more about recreation will probably let it lapse and go into and just buy it from that place. And we've made some estimates in those revenue projections that we have, both in the conversation we had last week on the ballot measure, as well as in those ordinance we're bringing forward, trying to guesstimate, if you will, what number will transition within that. And nobody really knows right now. But I think it's a good business model. Obviously, it's in place now, and these folks seem to believe that it will continue to be so.
Gotcha.
Bill?
Question in what we're building in here, which is we're showing that a retail marijuana establishment will allow for the purchase of 1 ounce per 21 or older adult per day. In the medical marijuana centers, they also have the opportunity to purchase plants. So, but from the retail perspective, we're saying no plants.
The statute, it doesn't address it. So we can affirmatively say no plants, or there's a provision in here that, if the statutes are subsequently updated or revised, it incorporates those in. So we're sort of defaulting to however the state regulations address plants.
We're jumping around
I
a little
think,
bit.
the way
I was talking about in context of packaging.
I think the way I read the retail is that they're not going to be selling plants, that you could get it on the medical side, but not right now on the retail side. I think that'll be quickly addressed because people that want to grow at home need to be able to get their plants somewhere.
Some other questions about that later, but yeah, thank you.
So the next section is on page 18, provisions applicable to existing medical marijuana centers. This provision just simply states that we are going to allow medical marijuana licensees to convert to retail or to hold both a retail and a medical marijuana license. Next section, dual operation. This allows them to operate.
Bruce, did you have a question?
Just real quick to go back on page 17, the very top is B. It says inventory. Just a question. It says all saleable inventory of marijuana must be kept and stored in a secured and locked manner. And I was just thinking, until you take it out to sell it,
Right, and I think we had talked about that last time. That comes from the medical marijuana code, and so I think we probably want to just say that it'll be locked at night, but not necessarily during the day, because as we had talked, this is more of a 7-Eleven model with people being able to browse, and it's not sort of behind the counter, locked up for people.
You know, it's great that it's secured so people don't go in and steal it. And that's probably in our interest to make sure that it's not being stolen, but yeah, there's got to be a little flexibility there,
The
otherwise.
jewelry store type thing, they keep their stuff behind the counter.
So it's going to be removed at the time of sale, you know, or something like that. I'm just suggesting.
So
This is too restrictive, is what I'm saying.
to keep, so you don't think it should be locked up in the store?
Well, according to this, you're never authorized to take it out. It's
But keep it locked up until someone buys it?
until the point of sale, until the time of sale, something like that, or until a purchase is in progress, or something simple like that.
I mean, allowing for the purchase is fine, but if you go to the way most of the retailers handle tobacco, it's now behind the counter. I mean, they're not putting out the individual, not cartons, packages, whatever. And so if you want a 1-ounce version of tobacco, you're asking somebody at the counter for it.
I think it should stay locked up. Okay, until they buy it.
Until they buy it.
Okay.
But hold a second. I don't know anything about this stuff, but won't they have maybe several strains of things, and won't somebody want to at least get, sounds silly to say this, but have a scent? I mean, have some way of figuring out what they might want to buy?
I think that's what Bruce was getting at.
Yeah,
Not the way I understand their packaging. I mean, it's going to be more like a cigarette pack. I mean, you're going to be able to make your choice between a Marlboro and a Camel, and
Because it says sealed.
but it's going to be sealed.
all of it is sealed. Yeah, but even at that, are they not going to be able to have something?
Well, they can, if the salesperson wants to take it out and they want to smell it, I think that's okay. It's just walking in and having stuff just on shelves that you can just go up and pick. That's what the locked, I think that would be the point.
Okay, so as long
But
as,
if you're assisted by a salesperson, like rings, jewelry,
yeah.
I think that's where we went. You okay with that?
Well, as long as it's clear in here.
Yeah.
So you're going to tweak it a bit?
Yes, I will. I will.
Thank you.
And then on dual operation, this just allows those who choose to get both types of licenses to operate on the same premises. But if they're going to do that, their medical marijuana patients have to be over 21. One thing I do want to make sure I understand is whether you do want those to be separate, distinct, walled-off premises with 2 entrances, or whether it's okay for them to be one big room as long as they keep their inventory separate, which is the way it's drafted, if that's your intent.
I think so. Yeah.
Leave it the way it's drafted.
Okay.
Kristen, can I go back up to, on that same page 18, line 15, about when it's going to be effective?
Yes.
You said prior to, I wonder if the word should be own.
Should be what?
Own, effective on January 1st, instead of prior to.
Oh, I think probably you're right.
Peggy.
I have to let Jim get some of them.
A little disappointed, I got to tell you.
Okay, I will take a look at that. I reworked that provision a lot, so I'm not surprised I missed that. So then 32129 on page 18 is just affirmatively stating that if the state fails to issue a license, we don't want to step in and license on our own. The next section, compliance with state law. This is the provision I was talking about, that if the state at some point adopts more stricter laws, that those are incorporated in here. The next section talks about its relationship with the Colorado Marijuana Code, and if there is some conflict, the more restrictive provisions will control. Under amendments, the next section under Amendment 64, persons over the age of 21 are allowed to possess marijuana accessories. And then I just wanted to get some, on page 20, I wanted to get some clarification. It sounds like I understand that we only want to allow 4 establishments in the city. I will need the language may not say 4, because if they're dual licensed, technically they would have 2 licenses. So there will be more than 4 licenses issued in the city, but there will only be 4 locations. So I'll draft that language, and you'll see that. Councilman.
Well, if we've got one that doesn't want to go retail, can we say 3 retail and 4 medical?
Why can't we just say total combined?
I probably will draft it as 4 locations, and they can have retail and medical at each of those locations. Is how I'm thinking I will address it. So it leaves open the door for the one medical that doesn't want to convert. In a year, they may decide that no one's coming in for medical, I want to be retail, or I want to do both.
I think you got to allow that.
I have a question about marijuana accessories.
Okay.
When Amendment 64 came through, did the state clean up the CRS regarding things like little pipes and bongs and all these things that were of great concern to parents because they were being sold out of gas stations, and they were being sold out of record stores, and they were being sold out of, and they were, whether they were or were not in compliance with the CRS, was a major issue of discussion and enforcement in this community for a long time. And what I'm reading here is all of them, any little dinky shop could sell accessories as long as they're not selling retail marijuana.
They can now.
Well, that's what my question was. Have they cleaned that? Did they clean those up so much so that that's the state of the law?
I don't
64.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll check.
It would be worth checking only because when little Johnny came home with something and he was buying a candy bar and he came back with a pipe, and Mom found it, and he said, I bought it in the store. It was a major issue, and we just need to know how to react to that.
Okay. All right, I will get that information for you.
Jim?
Now that we've gone through all of this, there was an issue right after Amendment 64 passed about marijuana clubs. Have we in this prohibited the establishment of a marijuana club in the city? And if not, do we need to address it?
I will bring that back to you on Tuesday.
Okay.
I'll add to that. There's a couple of other questions that I have. What would happen if someone, if we take the Canamart's new location, which is authorized, but a child care facility moves in next door?
The code says that things that happen after they're already located there do not affect the location.
And then a question to the city manager on, since this remains illegal from a federal perspective and still will involve a fair amount of cash, do we see that changing? And how is our audit going in dealing with primarily cash-only business?
I'm not sure I understand the first part of the question. We have not had issues with the existing retail. And to my knowledge, the audits have been going just fine, but we do have a greater tracking ability under the medical than we will under the retail. So it's something finance will probably need to look at and fine-tune over time. But there's no reason to expect that the business model would be any different.
And For clarification, this doesn't deal with the other code elements that we may see coming with regard home grow and safety there.
Yep, so on the home grow, that will come as part of the building code updates that we're going to do. And then the other piece, which Councilman Beckman alluded to, is the decriminalization of the 1 ounce piece, but that's the only other criminal amendment that we'll be making, and there's really no policy question in that because you have to come into compliance, so.
When are we going to see the code stuff? Homegrown?
September, I believe. I think it's the second meeting in September. September 3rd, Tuesday for first reading, and second reading will be October 10th.
And along with that, not only the possession, but under influence, if we have to do any feeling.
I don't believe we had to do anything on that. Chief Stevens said only the decriminalization, but I'll confirm.
State, that could be a state law.
Correct.
Okay. Did you have any?
So, my question again is whether there needs to be physical separation as it's drafted now. There doesn't. Did I already get it? Okay.
The answer's
I
no.
think they said
Okay,
no.
Okay, thanks. And then whether, right now we have a 2,000 square foot limitation, whether you want to increase that for those who are dual licensing, increase their square footage, or require that they maintain both retail and medical under the 2,000 square foot canopy.
I don't want to make them bigger.
I think the issue, if you don't, I guess I'm conflicted, but if you don't make it bigger and you've got a lot of customers coming in wanting to buy a product, that can create, I think, an unsafe situation.
If you see each of their locations, there shouldn't be a problem in terms of their size. I mean, there's one that may have a problem, but part of that's because of the way they've blocked off their entrance. But
Or blocked off the back half of their building, because in order to cut it down to 2,000 square feet, when the building is already existing for a 3,000 square foot sale area, but they blocked it off in order to comply with the 2,000. I just think that 2,000 is very limiting.
So how big is, I know it's a different issue, but how big are some of the liquor stores? Like,
They're all over the place.
well, I know, but I mean, do they
They're small
tend to
and
be a certain size? I mean, a certain size or less? I don't know.
their product is completely differently packaged, though. A case of beer is a completely different packaging than this. So in terms of size, it's not like they need tons and tons and tons of space for their inventory. It's small inventory.
A 2,000 square foot building would not be very much larger than this room.
I was just thinking.
I'm not in favor of it. I think this is also something that we keep it at the 2,000 if they want to come back and have some real concerns and some legitimate issues they want to bring to us, and some things that they would like us to consider making it bigger. Then at that point I'd be willing to hear them, but until I hear from them, I'm not willing to make a change on it. Anybody else? Jerry, Phil, where are you at the? No?
Leave it where it is, fine with me.
Okay.
The only other issue I had, just one of Peggy's issues I wanted to bring up, was she had some concerns about retail marijuana stores being able to sell to each other. Under the state law, they can sell to another store if it's less than 30% of their product. So I just wanted to bring that up.
That's state?
I think that may come about whenever one store is carrying an overabundance of one strain of product and a store someplace else doesn't have any at all, that's allowable to be transferred to the store.
Okay. Okay, great, thank you. A couple things, Peggy?
Yeah, I did ask, because there's probably a law that applies to everything on this, but do they have to pay in cash? Or credit card or whatever?
No, I looked at that too, you had raised that issue. The definition of sell also includes trade or barter. So presumably you could trade your watch for marijuana. I can't imagine that these businessmen are going to be accepting anything other than cash or credit. So I'm not
Because one of the
concerned.
reasons I was asking that is there could be ways to conceal the amount they're selling by bartering.
I think that goes to Councilman Cernanek's question about cash. I mean, it's very easy on a cash transaction to conceal, and it's a lot easier than having a bunch of, would you say, watches? As an example, a bunch of watches around there. Just have a cash transaction and no receipt. And that's, I think, why you asked the question, so.
Yeah.
Except that they have the tracking system, so I'm not sure. I mean, I suppose you could say you're selling it for less than you are. I guess that's how you do it.
Live in an entrepreneurial world.
Bruce?
More than you probably want to know, but there is a secondhand store requirement in the code too, and if they start taking things in like that, they become a secondhand store and have other obligations.
In the city you're talking about?
Here in Littleton, it's the law that includes basically pawn shops, but you know, like a firearms store takes in an old gun, trades it for a new gun. They do have to. They are now a secondhand store dealing with that kind of stuff.
And I know the state is working on its inventory tracking, and I don't know when might be a good time, but sometime before the middle of October, I'd like to hear an update on where that inventory tracking is.
Okay, a couple of things to wrap this up. The existing 4 licensed medical marijuana centers
Locations.
had asked us to convey to council some considerations. We've addressed a number of them. One of them that we haven't addressed is authorizing marijuana-infused products, kitchens on site of medical marijuana centers and retail stores. That's nowhere in here, right? Okay.
And not allowed under your medical code either.
Okay.
Say
So we're
again?
good with no kitchens?
It's not allowed under the medical code or this draft ordinance.
Okay. And then the other is to increase the 2-ounce limit to allow centers to sell higher amounts to those with an increased plant count waiver.
That's for medical.
And that's medical too. I would say no. Medical seems to be working quite nicely. Anybody say yes? No?
What was that again? Because I'm reading the Amendment 64, but
On the medical, it would be Amendment 20.
Yeah.
Because they're asking the medical questions.
No, when we
Yeah.
talked to the licensees, they used it as an opportunity to convey just problems in general that they're having. And one of them was that our medical marijuana code limits their sales to 2 ounces. And patients can go get a waiver to get more, but under our code, they can't sell more. So they were hoping that we would allow that limit to be raised if the patient had received one of those waivers. And they wanted that conveyed to you.
Then the other one is authorizing cultivation facilities at the same location as retail marijuana stores or medical marijuana centers.
You're not allowing
said
cultivation
no.
centers, yeah.
So, okay, we've addressed those. Any other questions or comments? This will come back to us Tuesday night.
so as far as then residential growth, that's what you're going to be drafting something on that?
Correct. It's within the building code, and because we're doing a full building code update, we're bringing it all as one big package.
Again, as I went going through 64, I was thinking there was more restrictions on growing it.
Only if we put those restrictions in, yes.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that's,
I mean,
so that's covered,
there's-
okay.
Yep,
All right, gotcha.
yep, it's being
Trying to
drafted.
find it. All right, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Okay, continuing our night of sin, microbreweries, microdistilleries, and limited wineries. Pot and booze night at the city.
This was the thing that, the second thing we had, yeah.
Yeah, item
1B.
1B. Okay, so, Glenn?
Yeah. Recently, you've seen some requests from entrepreneurs to open microbreweries, craft wineries, or microdistilleries in our commercial districts. And right now, per our code, we have a pretty strict separation of retail uses and industrial uses. So the way we've classified these uses coming in is that's really a manufacturing use. It should be an industrial in an industrial district. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is a safety issue. In an industrial district, you don't necessarily want to bring a lot of public traffic in because there could be things that blow up or toxic fumes, that sort of thing. And then the other reason is you don't want to fill up your retail space with someone who's manufacturing and doing wholesale work, and now your retail space is taken up. But we've got this kind of class of new uses that are somewhere in between. They do want to manufacture their product. They think that's part of the excitement for folks to see the process happen, see the wine in the big wood casks sitting there. Provide tastings, but then it's primarily a retail use where they're able to take packaged liquors and leave. So a lot of communities are working on this. I think from our standpoint, what we've looked at is there's really not an issue with the craft wineries, craft breweries. There's a little bit of an issue from a building code standpoint with distillery, because now you're creating spirituous alcohol that's greater than 16%, and it tends to catch on fire once in a while and tends to explode. But so the fire code is pretty specific about certain amounts that can be stored in one container for alcohol. So that means when you go into downtown or you're going into a commercial shopping center where you have a common wall, it may not meet the fire code rating for the amount or time it takes for fire to go from one occupancy into another. So in some cases for a micro distillery, they may have to do some pretty substantial improvements to the perimeter of the building. But for the most part, I think we support going in and amending our code. We would define what these uses are, and the actually follows very closely what state law is. They define a micro brewery as you're producing or selling less than 300,000 gallons a year, which sounds like an awful lot, but it's not. And then it goes down for winery. If you have a winery, it's 100,000 gallons, and if you're doing a micro distillery, it goes down to 50,000 gallons. And they're relatively small spaces. So we think we can define these uses and provide for them in our commercial districts, primarily B1, B2, and I think the CA district. And then we'll look at possible restrictions for the micro distilleries. And maybe that's a conditional use permit where we're absolutely assured we get to look and make sure they meet fire and building codes. But it may be an automatic thing as well. And I think part of my concern is there are, I have a small little diagram, but this is kind of a small, it's kind of what they do out in the woods when they made a still, but it's a much more scientific type of equipment.
Looks like my neighbor from Kentucky.
Does he have one of these? Is it coal-fired? So we would have to be kind of concerned that somebody might just move into an existing occupancy, but I think we can deal with that. What I showed here, if you can see that, so right now, the purple areas are our industrial districts in town. Some of them actually are part of a plan development, so they may exclude some of these uses. But really what we'd be talking about is allowing them in the pink areas, which are our future retail areas. It seems like a lot of communities, I think we quoted Aspen, Centennial, Boulder, Englewood, Fort Collins, Lone Tree, all are looking at draft ordinances, so I think we have a good body of work that we can draw from. And if council's interested, we'll move forward with this amendment to the code. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Bruce?
Is the mill, would that qualify as a microbrewery?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, the state has a classification called a brew pub, where you're allowed to brew. I believe they sell package as well, and then you're allowed to drink on site. Now, their requirement is you have to have a restaurant with that. You have to have food. And what we're talking about with the micros is they're not selling food. They're not allowing you to drink on site other than tasting. And it's limited. In fact, the state even goes so far as to say you have to have snacks on site. I'm not really sure why that is.
Not a bar.
It is not a bar, absolutely.
How much tasting do you get to do?
You know, I don't know the actual amount, but it is limited to a certain amount, certain size, and a certain number.
But you could go from one to another if we had more than one.
Yes, potentially you could.
Did you ever see what they give for tasting?
We're going to do open
2
containers.
swallows.
What does it matter?
Well, if I even smell it, I'm under the table, so.
Jim?
Well, I would like to see us move forward with allowing this. I took a walk yesterday up and down Main Street, and on Main Street there are 10 storefronts that are vacant. 3 of them do have signs in them saying something's coming, but the others, there's no activity going on. So anything we can do that would allow retail sales to occur, I think would be a benefit. And with these, the product that you taste, hopefully they would buy and would become then a retail possibility for the city.
Bill?
If they buy packages, is this?
Get up here where you can be heard.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Jim. These products, are they subject to city sales tax?
Yes, it would be. We tax alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so these are not groceries, even though they're
No.
kind of kitchen products. So. Okay. And
Kitchen products. They're not making cooking wine.
Not in my kitchen.
it's pretty close. It's pretty close to that.
Okay.
And then within these limits, it was kind of interesting because I saw something on which states drink more beer than any others. So, and surprisingly, Colorado was not in the top 10. So it was kind of interesting per individual. So it's B1, B2, and CA is what you're looking at the.
From a retail standpoint? Yeah. And then also some of the PDCs, we would actually have to go look because they actually prescribe allowed uses. So there may be some that just reference the B1 and B2 as being allowed. And some of them are restrictive and actually may have a restriction that wouldn't allow them.
Because a lot of the ones you've placed in pink are PDCs.
Right.
And that's
right.
what I was going to ask about.
It could shrink those pink areas, yeah.
Okay. And, yeah, I mean, I've been to winery tastings, and they usually provide a spittoon, but they're civil.
I'll put a provision for that. Now, one of the things some cities are doing, because it's kind of hard to track the amount of gallons, is they're actually limiting the size of the square footage, because you can only fit so many gallons in a certain size building, and they find that a much more easier way of enforcing the requirements.
Well, and I think the important part that you talked about with regard to the micro distilleries is with the preparation mechanism that's involved there, being safe to any surrounding areas.
Right, right.
Okay, so everybody, blessings for Glenn to bring this back. Cool.
Do have to go to the planning board first because it is amendment to the zoning code, so.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that I was impressed by all three of the folks who have asked for this. I think one of them came down, another one I got a call from, and he wants to do the winery, but they're all very, very knowledgeable, they're very educated. They are, business people, and I think they'd be, I would love to see these three land here if we could get this through. I think they'd be great businesses and business partners in the community, so. Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, so our next agenda item is a discussion on the South Platte Park Task Force scope of work from our breakfast meeting with the board from South Suburban. We concluded from that we were going to go ahead and form a task force to look at the management plan based on Scott's great in-depth report. And so the South Suburban Board is working on their scope, and we will have our scope, and Michael will then meet with Dave, I'm assuming, and go through the two scope documents and combine them into one. They'll probably have many shared items, and then those that we don't have on each other's will agree with on each other. So I think it'll be a pretty smooth process. So I think the best way to get it started is just kind of go around. If you've got something that you wanted included, I think a couple of the key points we wanted to think about is we've got to have budget considerations on this, and there was even a thought to start to create a reserve that we could feed into, and then when there was something more catastrophic at the park, that reserve would kick in. There'd be conditions upon its use, but some of the things Scott talked about that could happen. The other thing was to look at the uses, and then John brought up something regarding uses, being very specific about what's in the park, and those same uses, or a reduction in those uses, would not be on the exterior. So keeping in mind we're dealing with this very finite little area. So thoughts, input, items. Bruce.
During the breakfast, I tried to stimulate the discussion about where they were going to go with the Rangers.
Yeah.
Scott had brought that up as, in the past, just to review, they'd had, I think, 10 Rangers at one time. It was a very significant add-on for down there, and budget cuts took a toll, and they ended up with what they have now, which is barely a presence. It's a presence, but it's barely a presence. And his concern was not so much the nature side of the Rangers' duties, but the law enforcement side and the keeping good safe and order kind of circumstances down there. And so as good neighbors, I think our first tendency would be to say, well, perhaps we can help you with some law enforcement from the police department. But when I was trying to stimulate that discussion, what I was looking for really was to hear them say they want Rangers. Because taking that on from a law enforcement point of view and really taking it on is a significant add-on to the city, in my opinion. And I think it would be one that would have to be really talked about in our budget. And I don't think that's really what they want. I think they want Rangers. And the challenge with the Rangers is safety and training and all those other issues. But there are provisions in Colorado law for there to be a Ranger, and they've done it before. So my feeling would be that I would like to see them move in that direction and then figure out how the budget can support that. And then for the big ones,
move in the direction
of Rangers.
More Rangers.
More Rangers. And then when they have the big one or they need assistance or whatever, those are, you take the resources, put them in there for a period of time and pull them back out again. But that's not committing the police department to patrolling the park, which is just problematic. We have motorcycles, which we could do it with. We have vehicles that we could do it with. But they have better vehicles to do it with than we do.
Well, I would say then, in terms of the scope of work, that would be kind of the, one item
Going
to
around.
how do we, well, I'm just piggybacking on that for Michael, is that how do we integrate, what's the integration between law enforcement and rangers for scope of work? Because with the scope of work is they're going to research this stuff, look into it, analyze it, and then bring it back to both boards for a decision. So
That's correct. The scope of work
Okay.
would be what you,
Okay, so-
find the proper mix.
find that relationship mix
Right.
between, okay. Bruce.
One thing that didn't get discussed in depth at the breakfast, but we've had the request on is some level of commercial signage. The one that comes to mind is guys like Pedal, where they're on the trail, and is there, what's appropriate? And it's to date, it's been sort of zero tolerance for that kind of stuff. Certainly within the boundaries of the park itself, I don't know. I mean, I think there's areas where you wouldn't want that kind of stuff, but on the other hand, where we do have interface with commercial zones or enterprises, like where you're crossing under Bellevue.
But that's not in the park.
Well, and that's, I guess, where I was going, was but there's also no signage, because it's on the trail. So if it's in the park, I would agree with you. I don't think we need to have signage, commercial signage, but if it's on the trail, maybe that's not inappropriate, but if all they're doing is a scope of work for the park, then it's probably out of bounds. So I guess that was my question, is where, is it appropriate to have that conversation? And if not, that's fine, we can save it for another time.
Well, it may not be commercial signage, but there is the issue of the safety and speed limits and those types of
But
things.
I
So
like
what
that.
do we signage up that?
Yeah, I like Ostermiller's
Okay.
comment about, when you actually enter the park,
Right.
some sort of notification that it's a low-impact area and, tread carefully kind of stuff.
Okay. Jerry?
Well, I have a couple, rangers, of course, is one of them that Scott talked a lot about. The other one, and John had mentioned that, maintaining what we have versus increasing programs and other things and facilities. It seems like we do have a tendency to keep making things bigger, better, stronger, faster. I think it's time to really make sure we have adequate resources to maintain what we have. As my other one, as I wrote down here, was the safety of the walkers and joggers within the park boundaries. Scott had mentioned, as winter is approaching, more riders will be coming down and onto our trail there, and makes it, I think, a bigger issue. And then when you have the trail that's slippery and things like that, signage, my guess, would be the way to go. I'd hate to see more signs, but I don't know what else to do other than putting some tax down. That might not be acceptable either.
Speed bumps.
Speed bumps. Speed bumps may be, but then you get the other different types of bikes. But yeah, I think that's a huge issue right now for me, though, because I know when I go down there, the bikes, passing by kind of fast is a little creepy. And I like bikes. I have no problem with bikes, but I don't know if it's appropriate right there in that area.
Okay.
Yeah,
Phil?
I had an Audi pass me on C470 just about at the park that was going way too fast this morning.
Okay.
At least in my listening to some of our discussion, I see three pieces that can be at least initially worked somewhat separately but coming back together. One has to do with uses and access for the park, what's important to maintain it according to the charge for the park, and how do we deal with some of the issues of events and access that can both be educational as well as recognizing the ownership of the park still is the people, and that's the question that I have on that front. Second is dealing with safety and enforcement, and I would like that conversation to include not just the park, because I believe that one extends, because when we're talking about the rangers, their coverage is all of South Suburban.
Can I just stop you on that? This is just the management plan we're talking about. It does not go beyond that. I would not take the scope
I would
bigger.
challenge you on that, because I don't think you can talk about safety, because the rangers' coverage and police officers' coverage extends beyond the park. And if you don't get a coordinated activity that deals with communication across the whole area. That one, I believe, will be a mistake, and we'll short shrift that. And then the third is dealing with budgets, costs, reserves, cost to maintain, and dealing with the financing side of it. And those certainly are three. They come together at some point in time, because certainly they do, but I see them as possibly involving different folks from both staffs at South Suburban and with the city to be able to put some pretty hard pencils to those.
Okay, Jim?
The all-day charrette that's coming up on the South Platte Working Group, are they going to be talking about stuff going on in the park as well? Or is it just primarily north of the park?
Yeah, I don't think we're really looking at anything in the park. The closest it gets is Reynolds Landing. There may be some reference to the restoration work we're doing, but we're not looking at doing anything in the park.
Okay. The other things that I think needs to be looked at when they get this group together is protecting the river flora and fauna. And then also, how are we going to address habit trails that are causing erosion, bank destabilization, these types of things.
Okay? Peggy?
I think people have pretty much covered it, but I really want us to focus on how we deal with habits, not just habit trails, and the apparent park versus the whole corridor. How we can get people to understand the difference. And I mean, I did talk about this at the breakfast, so I probably don't really need to say it more here. But when you have essentially a highway all up and down the river for bikers and joggers and walkers and so forth, it's hard for them to understand when they move from the one part into the actual park. And that's what I would really like us to look at.
Okay. In terms of the rangers, part of that study, I think, should include a serious look at, can't think of the word now, but committed ranger, that there are one or two. What would it cost? What's the budget? Dedicated, exactly, to South Platte Park, because there aren't. There are 5 rangers that split their time 25%, and those same rangers then, depending just their presence in the park, even if they're planting trees or spraying weeds or something like that, just their presence, I think, helps. So I would like them to look at dedicated rangers. And I know that Alta is putting together a use traffic thing, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near what we expect and what we want and what we should have. And I'd like to get a really solid baseline park usage every single month. What kind of usage do we see down there? What are the numbers? They do the bird counts, as Scott was telling us, and there are companies that will come in there and they will do a very thorough, this is your annual use, these are the number of people, these are the types of uses you're seeing, and these many fishermen, and these are the numbers. So I think knowing that and having a baseline for that is going to help as we see the use increase and help us make some decisions about maintenance and restoration projects and those types of things. I also think that a very serious look at, and whether we do it or not isn't the point, it's taking a look at limited use in the park, where we go in there and we we have specific areas where we stop the use or we limit the use. And that can shift from year to year as things heal and come back and that type of thing. But some of the erosion he was showing us, some of the social trails, some of the bank damage, that stuff can come back. It can be repaired, but we have to shift usage around. So what does that look like? And, of course, budget. I'm really very, very interested in what we have to do for our reserves. The other thing, which wasn't brought up, but Scott and I had a conversation about this, and I thought it was brilliant. I don't know why we haven't done it. You said that it happened a number of years ago, 25-plus years ago. But a Friends of the Park, similar to the Friends of the Library and Museum, to create a Friends of the Park group. And the dues into that group can help pay for things like fixing up the Carson Nature Center or going in and repairing a damaged trail or putting. So what would that kind of group look like, and how would that happen? Take a look at that. Phil, and then Jim.
Well, and mine is a question of those folks that are participating on the Highline Canal working group as well, which is, we also have a commitment there to deal with the Highline Canal, and there's a need there. So when we start talking about where's some of the funding coming from and what is the city doing, we shouldn't be looking at South Platte Park and without looking at what's some of our commitment across our trail system as well.
Jim.
This is not necessarily about the task force, but it's something I think the city needs to put on its radar. Looking at annexing the Saperchi property into the park.
Oh, yeah.
Secondly, to annex those parts that Scott identified that are in the city of Littleton that are not in the park, and they're not going to be used for anything but park purposes.
Well, there's the
annex
new-
those into the park. And the third thing is reach some kind of IGA on law enforcement, so we're not dealing with Jefferson County, Arapahoe County, State Patrol, and our own police department.
Okay, so an IGA down on the south
Yes.
road, and then, yeah, those annexations. Bruce?
A side comment during that was that Charlie and I don't know who all talked with, that we could just annex that. It would be so much clearer to just annex that from the county.
All of those are on the list.
Okay. Perfect. That's a good list. Peggy?
In terms of what you said, Deb, about the heavily used areas, maybe closing down, do whatever, I'd like them to see if they can get some research on the effectiveness of that. I think Scott said that when you have certain things, it may take 3 or 4 years to restore. But once people use a place and love it, even if they've worn it to pieces, they may keep using it. And to try to get them to use now a different place may result just in wearing down more places. I mean, breaking those habits is really a challenge because most of those habits are beloved habits. So I wish they'd look at that to see, is this really the best way to try to deal with the problem that we're experiencing?
Okay. Jim?
Along those lines, I think, because fishermen, and this was the example they were showing, was fisherman damage. But maybe you build a platform. It doesn't have to go way out into the lake, but that's where they want to fish. That's maybe where they're catching the fish, or maybe it's the only place there is access to get to do the fishing. So in the budget, you have to look at building platforms for fishermen specifically to use, and because you're right, they damage it here, you move them someplace else, they damage it there, and before long, you're not going to be able to have the time to recover everything that needs to be done.
Well, and I think to have them look at that whole scope of options there, because one of the things that has been done in other areas is to institute a catch and release. And so if just the park is a catch and release, then the fishing starts to gets a little less. but they can go outside of the park, just the other side, and it's not a catch and release. So you're not eliminating catch and release from the river, but you're, so it's, and that's all the stuff that, hopefully with the scope, that gets investigated. And I think the other thing is the whole idea of, and this is kind of part of a bigger picture too, is that the South Suburban's been kind of mandated or designed it to have a huge educational component to this. And part of that educational component is putting some of the wear and tear. So can that educational component start to help pay for some of this? So other funding sources, other revenue opportunities, users, I think if you're going 15 miles or faster on your bike, you should pay $50 to get through. Then we don't care. Then we encourage the speed. No, but that type of thing. I mean, I think it's worth looking at if it's even something feasible. It is being done at other parks, not speeders like that, but for educational uses, large groups. And that also segues into the whole idea that Scott talked about in terms of the permitting and how many activities and how big and what kind. So that needs to be vetted pretty good too. Okay, if there's any more, email Michael. Okay, that it? We have a breakfast Thursday with the library, museum, and fine arts committees.
At the library.
It's
At the museum.
At
At the museum.
And I won't be there, Debbie, I'm going to be at.
Okay, and Phil's gone too. Okay.